A 9-year-old
Can you
girl
make
with a
sure I
healing
don't
fracture
fall?
and a plastic hospital bracelet, 8 months old, stepped off the county bus at 9:02 a.m., carrying a folder against her chest. Like a shield, for 11 months, she had survived in silence. For 9 weeks, her arm had been broken and never properly set. But on this freezing November morning, she made a choice that grown adults with law degrees and badges had refused to make. She walked to the courthouse alone. And what the man in the leather vest did when she whispered 8 words to him would expose a predator the system had protected for years, and prove that courage doesn't wait for permission. This is Calla and Granger's story. And if you believe every child deserves one person who doesn't look away, drop where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe, because what happens in the next 4 hours will restore your faith in strangers. Can you make sure I don't fall? Those were the 8 words. Not a scream, not a demand. A question asked so quietly that Wyatt Flint, called Granger by everyone who knew him, almost didn't hear it over the wind off the hills. He'd been standing on the East Courthouse steps for 6 minutes, early for a 10:30 scheduling hearing on a brother's DUI appeal. Coffee in his left hand. Vest zipped against the cold. Watching the square the way a man learns to watch after 3 combat deployments and 27 years of making sure other people's children don't vanish the way his own son did. He noticed her because she didn't move. Everyone else crossed Courthouse Square with somewhere to go. Attorneys in dark coats, county workers with ID badges, a woman with a stroller cutting diagonal toward the pharmacy. All of them moving through the cold with purpose. But the girl on the second step from the bottom sat perfectly still. Pink sweater 2 sizes too small. Gray leggings with a safety pin holding a tear at the knee. White sneakers with separating soles and mismatched laces, one white, one yellow. Folder pressed to her chest. Breath fogging in the 33-degree air. She sat there for 4 full minutes before she noticed him noticing. Her eyes went to his hands first, then his vest, then his face. Then she stood up, took 11 careful steps across the cold concrete, stopped 3 feet away, and looked up at him. Granger saw the bruise first. Faded yellow-green along her right jaw. 2 weeks old, maybe 3. The kind that starts purple and takes its time leaving. Then he saw her left arm, held close to her body at a slight angle. The way a person holds an injury long after the worst pain has passed, but the fear of re-injury hasn't. Then he saw the hospital bracelet. Pale blue plastic around her left wrist. Faded ink, barely legible. Merritt, Calla, Pediatric. March 17th. It was November. That bracelet was 8 months old. She'd never taken it off. Can you make sure I don't fall? 8 words. The word fall doing all the work. Literally physical. The bad arm, the steep courthouse steps, the cold making her hands shake. Figuratively catastrophic. The testimony, the courtroom, the moment when she'd have to speak and someone would decide if her words were enough. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was asking to be steadied. Granger set his coffee on the railing without looking at it. Crouched to her eye level, all 6'3" of him folding down so his face was 8 inches from hers. He didn't speak. He waited. Nobody falls while I'm standing here. His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't need volume because it carries weight. He opened his left hand, palm up, rested it on his knee. An offer, not a demand. Then he turned his body 45 degrees, back to the courthouse, facing the square, putting himself physically between her and everything behind him. Calla looked at his hand, at the scars on his knuckles, at the calluses that come from decades of gripping motorcycle handlebars and not much else that's gentle. She didn't take it. Not yet. But she stayed. The courthouse clock read 9:17 a.m. Her testimony was scheduled for 11. She had 1 hour and 43 minutes to decide if she could walk through those doors and say out loud what had been happening at 214 Harrow Mill Road for 11 months. Granger didn't ask what she was doing there, didn't ask where her parents were, didn't ask if she needed help. He just stayed crouched, waiting. And that's when she told him. Not all of it, not at first. He hurt me. 3 words, flat delivery, like reading from a script she'd rehearsed until it stopped meaning anything. A lot of times, I didn't tell anyone for a long time because he said they'd take me farther away. 23 more words, still flat, still too practiced. Granger's jaw tightened, but he didn't move, didn't reach for her, didn't interrupt. They found out anyway. Somebody saw my arm. Her right hand touched the bad one without thinking. A reflex. Now I have to go in there and look at him and say it happened. I'm scared he'll make them not believe me. 34 words. And now her voice wasn't flat anymore. It was shaking. Granger stayed crouched, eye level. His knees had to be aching by now on the cold concrete. He didn't stand. What's his name? Harlan. She said it like the name itself hurt. Harlan Driscoll. He's my guardian. He's supposed to take care of me. Supposed to. 2 words that carried the whole story. Granger's mind was already moving. Guardian meant court-appointed. Meant the parents were gone. Meant this child had lost everything once already, and then the person given legal authority to protect her had... He stopped that thought, focused on her face. You walked here alone this morning. It wasn't a question, it was an observation, stated as fact. Calla nodded. The bus. I had change from... I found it in the couch. She'd paid for the bus with change from a couch. Because she had no money. Because whoever was supposed to care for her had made sure she had nothing. What time did you get here? 9:02. Specific. She'd been watching the clock. Planning. This wasn't impulse. This was a 9-year-old child executing a mission. Granger's chest felt heavy. The good kind of heavy. The kind that comes when you realize you're looking at someone braver than most adults you've ever met. You know what you just did? His voice was still quiet, still steady. You made a choice. You got on a bus alone. You came to this building. You sat on these steps and you waited for something to be different. That's not a girl who's already gone. Calla's eyes went shiny, but she didn't cry. Will you walk with me? Not can you. Not would you. Will you? The difference mattered. Granger reached into the inner lining of his vest. Unpinned a small bronze medallion, worn smooth from decades of handling. The Hells Angels insignia barely visible anymore. He pressed it into her right palm, closed her fingers around it. You hold that until you come back out. That's my word in your hand." Then he stood, pulled his phone from his pocket, looked at the courthouse doors, at the clock, at this child who'd just handed him a responsibility he had no legal authority to accept and every moral obligation to take. "I need to make some calls. You stay right here. Eat this." He pulled a protein bar from his vest pocket, set it on the step beside her. "I'll be back in 4 minutes." He walked 20 feet to the corner of the building, far enough for privacy, close enough that she could still see him. Then he made the first call. The phone rang twice. "Shepard." Granger didn't waste time. "It's Granger. I need every brother within 50 miles at Mercer County Courthouse. Right now." Silence. 1 second. That's all Shepard needed to process. "What's the situation?" 9-year-old girl. Testifying against her guardian today. Abuse. She walked here alone. No one's protecting her." Another second of silence. Not hesitation. Calculation. "How many do you need?" "As many as will come." "They're coming. What's the address?" 1 Courthouse Square, Claiborne, East Entrance. We'll be there in 40 minutes. The line went dead. Granger made 3 more calls. Same pattern. Same response. No one asked for proof. No one asked if he was sure. They just asked what time and where, because that's what Brotherhood meant. When he walked back to the steps, Calla was holding the protein bar. Hadn't opened it. Just holding it like she didn't quite believe it was hers to eat. "They're coming," Granger said simply. "Who?" "My family." He sat down on the step beside her. Not close enough to crowd her. Close enough that she wasn't alone. "Tell me what happened. From the beginning." And she did. Not all at once. In pieces. The way trauma comes out when you've been carrying it alone for too long. Layer 1. The surface. "My parents died. Car accident. 11 months ago." Her voice was mechanical. Facts without feeling. "Harlan was assigned as my guardian 8 days later. He worked for the county. Foster care coordinator. Everyone said I was lucky. That he knew how to take care of kids." Granger listened. Didn't interrupt. "He moved me into his house. Told me the rules. Said I needed to adjust. That grief makes kids difficult, and I needed to be grateful someone wanted me." Layer 2. Deeper. "He started taking things away. My phone first. Said I was spending too much time on it. Then he sold my parents' house, the farmland, all of it. Said he was managing the money for me. That I'd get it when I turned 18. Her hands were shaking now, the protein bar trembling in her grip. "He locked the refrigerator at night. Said I was sneaking food and needed to learn self-control. My room got colder. He said the heater was broken. That he'd fix it when he had time." She swallowed hard. "He never fixed it." Layer 3. The system failures. "My teacher noticed. Mrs. Whitfield. She asked me questions. I didn't know what to say." Calla's voice dropped. "She filed a report. I heard her tell another teacher. She said someone would come check on me." "Did they?" "Harlan's office got the call. He works in the department that handles those calls. He told them everything was fine, that I was going through normal grief responses. They closed it." Granger's hands were clenched on his knees, but his voice stayed level. "That happened once?" "Twice. Mrs. Whitfield tried again 3 months later. Same thing." Calla looked at her sneakers. "Then I got transferred to a different school. Harlan said it was for a fresh start, but Mrs. Whitfield wasn't there anymore. No one knew me." Layer 4. The breaking point. Calla was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. 3 nights ago, I couldn't sleep. I heard him on the phone, in his study. The door was open a little. She closed her eyes, reciting from memory. He said, "I've been doing this for 11 years. My word carries more weight than a child who can't even name the days of the week correctly." Then his lawyer said something about an expert witness, and Harlan said, "Experts say what they're paid to say. What they don't have is physical evidence because there isn't any. Bruises fade. That's a medical fact, not a cover-up." Granger felt something cold settle in his chest. "There was more," Calla whispered. He said, "After Thursday, I'm moving for resumed full guardianship. She'll be placed with my cousin in Harlan County within the week. Distance is the best thing for everyone." And then his lawyer asked about the estate, and Harlan said, her voice broke. He said, "Closes in 14 months. I just need her quiet until then. Same as last time." Same as last time. 3 words that meant this wasn't the first time. Meant there was another child. Another case. Another ending that hadn't gone well. Granger's jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. "You memorized that." I whispered it into my pillow, 3 times, until I had it. She looked up at him. He sounded like it was already over. Like I was already gone. "It's not over." Granger's voice was granite. "You walked out here alone this morning. You sat on these steps. You waited for something to be different. That's not a girl who's already gone. You hear me?" Calla nodded. Small. Fragile. "We'll walk every step with you." He checked his watch. 9:51 a.m. The first bikes would be arriving any minute. They came like thunder on the horizon. Distant at first. A low rumble that most people in the square didn't notice yet. But Granger heard it. Felt it in his chest. Calla looked up. "What is that?" "That's my brothers. And they're here for you." The rumble grew. Louder. Closer. Until it wasn't just sound anymore. It was physical. The kind of presence that makes windows rattle and car alarms wake up and people stop mid-step to turn and look. The first motorcycle pulled into the square at 9:58 a.m. A Harley fat boy. Rider in full leather. Hell's Angel's patch visible on his back. Then another. And another. By 10:05, there were 18 motorcycles parked in formation across the street. Engines cutting off one by one until the sudden silence felt heavier than the noise had been. 18 men. Standing beside their bikes. Not moving. Not shouting. Just present. Granger stood, offered his hand to Calla. This time she took it. They walked across the square together. Toward the bikes. Toward the men who'd dropped everything and ridden here on 4 words from a phone call. The first brother Granger reached was called Ironside, 51, former paramedic, 22 years in the club, built like a truck and gentle like a grandfather. Ironside looked at Calla, at her arm, at her weight. His jaw set. He didn't speak for 10 full seconds. Then he crouched. Same way Granger had, eye level. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "You understand? Whatever happens today, you're safe." Calla nodded. The second brother was Shepard, 46, ex-Marine. Ran the chapter's Veterans Outreach Program, the one Granger had called first. He didn't crouch. He stood back, giving space. But his eyes were on the courthouse doors, like he was calculating angles and exit routes and how many brothers would fit between those doors and this child. The third was Cole, 54, Kentucky native. Grew up 4 towns from Claiborne. Knew every county clerk, every bailiff, every judge's name, and which ones took coffee with 2 sugars. Cole caught Granger's eye, tilted his head toward the courthouse. "Judge Whitmore's on the bench today," he said quietly. "He's had Harlan on his community advisory board for 6 years. Granger's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened fractionally on Calla's. "Then we make sure he sees her walk in, and who's standing behind her when she does." By 10:22 a.m., there were 41 motorcycles in the square. By 10:47, the number had grown to 96. And at 10:53, 7 minutes before Calla's testimony was scheduled to begin, the formation had reached 300. 300 men. From 9 chapters across 4 states, who got the call and came. Not one of them had been asked to wear anything other than what they already had on. The courthouse steps were lined, both railings, the east entrance, the side approach. Everywhere Calla would have to walk, there was a wall of leather and chrome, and men who'd decided that this child would not walk alone. Granger crouched one more time. In front of Calla. On the cold courthouse steps where she'd sat alone less than 2 hours ago. "You ready?" Calla looked at the doors, at the 300 men standing between her and every way out, at the medallion still clutched in her right hand. "I'm scared." "I know. That's okay. Brave doesn't mean not scared. Brave means scared and going anyway." He stood, offered his hand again. "We'll walk every step." And they did. 300 men stood in perfect formation as Calla Merritt walked up the courthouse steps. They didn't cheer, didn't clap, didn't make a sound. They just stood there. Leather vests catching the pale November light. Engines silent. Arms at their sides, creating a corridor of presence from the sidewalk to the doors. Now you might be thinking a Hells Angels escort means chaos. Confrontation. Raised voices and threats, and the kind of scene that gets people arrested. That's not what this was. This was 300 men who understood that the most powerful thing they could do for a 9-year-old girl walking into a courtroom was simply be there. Visible. Undeniable. A living wall that said, "She is not alone. She will never be alone again." Granger walked on her left, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Not guiding her. Just there. Calla held the bronze medallion in her right hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. At the top of the steps, a bailiff stood in the doorway. He'd been watching the bikes arrive for the past hour. Watched the formation grow from 18 to 41 to 96 to 300. His radio had been crackling non-stop. County sheriff asking if they needed backup. Courthouse administrator asking what the hell was going on. The bailiff was 62. Worked this building for 19 years. He'd seen protests, seen family reunions that turned into brawls, seen every kind of chaos a county courthouse could produce. This wasn't chaos. This was order. Disciplined. Calm. And somehow more intimidating than any shouting match he'd ever broken up. Calla stopped at the door, looked up at Granger. "They can't all come in." "I know, but they'll be right here when you come back out." She looked back at the formation. at 300 faces she didn't know. 300 strangers who'd ridden here for her. Then she walked through the doors, courtroom 3B, second floor, East Wing, Judge Marcus Whitmore presiding, 61 years old, 23 years on the bench. Harlan Driscoll had sat on his community advisory board for 6 of those years. They'd shared coffee at the Rotary Club, discussed foster care reform over lunch at the diner on 4th Street. The judge knew Harlan's voice, his mannerisms, the way he spoke about the children in his care, with that careful, measured concern that made you think you were talking to someone who genuinely gave a damn. At 10:58 a.m., Judge Whitmore looked up from his notes and saw Calla walk into his courtroom with a man in a Hells Angels vest beside her. The judge's expression didn't change, but his pen stopped moving. The district attorney, a woman named Sarah Harper, 39, who'd been working child abuse cases for 11 years, stood from the prosecutor's table. She'd met Calla once, 3 days ago, in a victim advocate's office with soft lighting and a box of tissues on every table. The girl who'd sat across from her then had been so quiet, Sarah had wondered if she'd be able to testify at all. The girl walking toward the witness stand now had her chin up, her shoulders back. She was still terrified. Sarah could see it in the way her left hand trembled. But she was here. And she wasn't alone. Harlan Driscoll sat at the defense table in pressed khaki trousers and an Oxford shirt. Wire-rimmed glasses. Hair side-parted and graying at the temples. He looked like every guidance counselor and Little League coach and PTA treasurer you'd ever met. He looked safe. That was the whole problem. When Calla took the stand, she didn't look at him. Not yet. She looked at Sarah Harper, at the judge, at the court reporter whose fingers were poised over the keys. Then she looked through the courtroom windows, at the formation of motorcycles still visible in the square below. Sarah Harper approached the stand slowly. She'd done this 63 times. 63 child witnesses. And every single time she had to balance 2 impossible things: get the testimony on record and don't re-traumatize a kid who'd already been through hell. Calla, can you tell the court your name and age? Calla Merritt, I'm 9. Her voice was quiet but clear. Practiced, like she'd been rehearsing this moment in her head for months. And where do you live? A pause. 1 second. 2. I used to live with my parents at 1847 Old Mill Road, but they died. Now I live at 214 Harrow Mill Road with Harlan. She said his first name like it was something she had to spit out. Calla, I'm going to ask you some questions about what happened while you've been living at that address. If you need to stop at any time, you can tell me, okay? Calla nodded. Can you tell the court what happened to your arm? Calla's right hand went to her left forearm. That reflexive touch again. He hit me. I put my arm up. It broke. 7 words. No elaboration. Just fact. When did this happen? 9 weeks ago. He didn't take me to the hospital for 4 days. He said it was just bruised, that I was being dramatic. Sarah's voice stayed level. Professional. But her hands tightened on her notepad. And when you did go to the hospital, what did the doctor say? That it was fractured, that it should have been set right away. But by then it had started healing wrong. Harlan's attorney, a man named Roland Mace, 57, who'd built a career defending people who looked too respectable to do the things they were accused of, stood slowly. Objection. Hearsay. The medical record speaks for itself. Judge Whitmore looked at Sarah Harper. The medical record has been entered into evidence, Your Honor. I'm establishing the timeline through the witness's first-hand account. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Harper. Sarah turned back to Calla. Did Mr. Driscoll explain to anyone how your arm was broken? He told the doctor I fell off the porch steps. He was there the whole time. When the doctor asked me, he answered before I could. Is that what happened? Did you fall? Calla's hands were shaking now, but her voice didn't waver. No. I was in my room. He came in. He was angry because I'd taken food from the kitchen after 8 p.m. That's against his rules. He grabbed my arm. I tried to pull away. He shoved me. I put my arm up so he wouldn't hit my face. It broke when I hit the wall. The courtroom was silent. Sarah Harper let that silence sit for 3 full seconds. Long enough for every person in that room to absorb what a 9-year-old child had just said, in a voice that was too calm, too practiced, too used to not being believed. Calla, did you tell anyone what really happened? I tried to tell the doctor, but Harlan kept talking over me. And then when we left, he told me that if I said anything different from his story, they'd take me away and I'd never see anyone I knew ever again. Did you believe him? Yes. Why? Because it already happened. My teacher filed a report. Mrs. Whitfield. She said someone would come check on me. But Harlan works in the office that gets those reports. He told them everything was fine. Nothing changed. Sarah Harper nodded slowly. Then she asked the question that would crack the case wide open. Calla, 3 nights ago, did you hear Mr. Driscoll speaking to someone on the phone? Yes. Can you tell the court what you heard? And Calla did. Word for word. Exactly as she'd whispered it into her pillow until she'd memorized every syllable. The conversation about experts saying what they're paid to say. About bruises fading. About moving her to Harlan County within the week. About needing her quiet until the estate closed. About same as last time. When she finished, Harlan's face was still composed, still calm, but his attorney's pen had stopped moving. Sarah Harper walked to the prosecutor's table, picked up a folder, opened it. Your Honor, the state would like to enter into evidence a life insurance policy taken out by Mr. Driscoll 4 years ago on a child named Tatum Greer. A child who was also under his guardianship. A child who died 3 years and 2 months ago in a fall down the stairs at Mr. Driscoll's residence. A death ruled accidental. She placed the document on the clerk's desk. The policy paid out $163,400, 14 days before Tatum's 12th birthday. The same birthday on which her grandmother's trust would have transferred to a children's account outside Mr. Driscoll's control. The judge's expression finally changed. The recess was called at 11:47 a.m. Calla was escorted to a witness room. Granger went with her. So did a victim advocate named Marie, who brought hot chocolate and a blanket, and the kind of practiced gentleness that comes from doing this job too long. Granger stepped into the hallway, pulled out his phone. Cole was already calling. We got a problem. Talk. Hatchet pulled Harlan's guardianship files. Found something. Meet us at the clubhouse. Now. The Iron Valley Clubhouse sat 3 miles outside Claiborne. Converted garage. Pool table. Bar that only served coffee after noon. Walls covered in photographs from 40 years of rides and funerals and the kind of brotherhood that doesn't fit on a resume. When Granger walked in at 12:21 p.m., 6 brothers were already gathered around the table in the back room. Hatchet sat at the center. 41. 2 years of criminal justice before he dropped out and patched in. He'd spent the past 90 minutes reading legal documents that made his jaw tighter with every page. He looked up when Granger entered. "We thought we were stopping one predator. We were wrong." He turned his laptop so Granger could see the screen. 3 layers of discovery, each worse than the last. Layer 1, Harlan's financial records. Twice, 57, done 2 stretches, came out with a paralegal certificate both times, had pulled Harlan's bank statements through connections that weren't exactly legal, but weren't exactly prosecutable either. "Look at the dates," Twice said, tapping the screen. March 17th, 3 years ago. Deposit of $163,400, labeled Estate Settlement, Greer. November 3rd, 2 years ago. Withdrawal of $31,400. Check memo. Boat purchase. April 22nd, 18 months ago. Withdrawal of $47,200. Labeled Home Improvement. August 8th, 1 year ago. Transfer of $24,800. Recipient, Driscoll Mace, Aggregate, LLC. "That last one," Granger said quietly. "Driscoll Mace." "Yeah," Hatchet nodded. "Harlan's brother-in-law, and Roland Mace, his attorney. Same company." Layer 2. The pattern emerges. Cole had cross-referenced county records. Found 3 other children placed under Harlan's guardianship in the past 12 years. 3 children. 3 estates. 2 of them closed within 18 months of placement. One of them, a boy named Marcus Edwards, 7 years old, had been transferred to a different guardian after 6 months. No estate. No payout. Just a transfer. The other 2? Dead. Tatum Greer, 11. Fell down the stairs. $163,400 insurance payout. Before that, a girl named Sienna Walsh. 10. Died of what the death certificate called complications from pneumonia. $187,200 insurance payout. Both deaths ruled accidental. Both estates settled within 60 days. Both payouts deposited to accounts Harlan controlled. Layer 3, same signature. Shepard, 46, ex-Marine, the one who could read a legal document faster than most lawyers, laid out 3 guardianship petitions side by side. "Look at the language," Granger read. "The undersigned petitioner has extensive experience in child welfare services and is uniquely positioned to provide stable care during this period of grief and adjustment." Same sentence. 3 different petitions. 3 different children. Petitioner requests appointment as both guardian and trustee to ensure efficient estate management in the minor's best interest. Word for word, copy-pasted, not even bothered to change the phrasing. "This wasn't opportunistic," Shepard said quietly. "This was a system. Target grieving families. Fast-track the appointment. Drain the estate. If the kid becomes a problem..." He didn't finish the sentence. Ironside, 51, former paramedic, the one who'd crouched in front of Calla and promised her she was safe, was standing by the window, looking out at the parking lot, not speaking. When he finally turned around, his voice was rough. "How many victims are we talking about?" "3 confirmed dead," Hatchett said. "Calla makes 4 living. But if this pattern goes back 12 years, and we're only seeing the guardianship cases..." He pulled up another screen. Foster placements. Harlan had been a licensed foster care coordinator for 16 years. In that time, he'd personally supervised placements for 47 children. 47. "We need to find out where they all are," Granger said. Nobody spoke. The refrigerator hummed in the corner. Somewhere outside, a motorcycle idled and cut off, and every man in that room understood the same truth at the same time. They weren't trying to save one girl. They were trying to stop something that had been killing children for more than a decade. The name Cole found belonged to a woman named Patricia Venner. 63. Supervisor for Child Protective Services. The person Agnes Whitfield's mandated reporter complaint had been routed to. The person who'd sent it to Harlan's department for internal response. The person who'd closed the case in 11 days without a single follow-up interview. Shepard and Granger found her at her home at 3:17 p.m. Small brick house on a quiet street. Garden gnomes in the flower bed. A Subaru in the driveway with a bumper sticker that read, "Every child deserves a safe home." She opened the door with a smile that died the second she saw who was standing there. "Ms. Venner," Granger said quietly. "We need to talk about Calla Merritt, and Tatum Greer, and Sienna Walsh." Her face went pale. "I don't know what you—" "Yes, you do." Shepard's voice was calm, factual. The voice of a man who'd done interrogations in Fallujah and knew exactly when someone was about to break. "Agnes Whitfield filed a complaint 5 months ago. You had a legal obligation to investigate. Instead, you sent it to Harlan Driscoll's office, the same man who was abusing the child." Patricia's hands were shaking. She stepped back, started to close the door. Granger put his hand on it, not forcefully, just firmly. "We're not here to hurt you. We're here to give you one chance. Tell us everything from the beginning. Or we make one phone call and you answer to people with far less patience than we have." She broke in 47 seconds. Not because she was threatened, because she'd been carrying the weight of what she'd done for 5 months, and nobody had asked her about it until now. She told them everything. How Harlan had called her directly after Agnes's complaint came in. How he'd explained that Calla was struggling with grief, acting out, that he was handling it with therapeutic support, that an investigation would traumatize her further. How Patricia had believed him. Because Harlan had worked in the system for 16 years. Because his record was spotless. Because it was easier to believe a respected coordinator than to believe a child was being tortured 3 miles from her office. "Did you know about Tatum?" Shepard asked quietly. Patricia's voice broke. "Not then. Not until I saw the name in the news 3 years ago. And I wondered, but I didn't." She couldn't finish. "How many complaints did you route to him?" 3, over 4 years. "And how many did you investigate yourself?" Silence. Granger felt something heavy settle in his chest. Not anger, not anymore. Just the specific grief that comes from looking at someone who could have stopped it. Who saw it, and chose not to. "You're going to write down every case," he said quietly. "Every complaint, every name, every date. And you're going to give it to the FBI when they knock on your door. Which they will. In about 3 hours. Patricia nodded, tears streaming down her face. They left her standing in her doorway. As they walked to their bikes, Shepard spoke without looking at Granger. That was the part that makes it hard. What part? The villain's easy to understand. He's a predator. He made a calculation. But her? Shepard shook his head. She's just someone who didn't want the paperwork, didn't want the conflict, didn't want to be the one who made it worse, and 3 kids are dead because of it. Granger didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Special Agent Elena Ruiz arrived at the clubhouse at 4:42 p.m. Plain clothes, practical jacket, exhaustion in her face that no amount of coffee could touch. She'd been working a multi-state investigation into guardianship fraud for 8 months. Built a case legally, carefully, by the book. And while she'd been building it, Calla Merritt had been freezing in a room with no heat. She walked into the clubhouse like she'd done this before. No visible nervousness, no performance of authority. Just a federal agent who'd learned a long time ago that the people with the most useful information were rarely the ones sitting in government offices. Granger met her at the door. Agent Ruiz. Mr. Flint. He nodded once, didn't extend his hand. Neither did she. I'm told you have something relevant to an open federal investigation. Depends on what you're investigating. Harlan Driscoll, and the network he's been operating for at least 12 years. Granger looked at his brothers. A decision was made without words. He led her to the back room. The skepticism came first. It always did. How long has your office known about Driscoll? Granger's voice was quiet. Even. But the question landed like a stone. Agent Ruiz's expression didn't change, but she stopped writing. We opened the file 6 months ago. We got Calla out this morning. You had 6 months. A beat of silence. Ruiz didn't defend herself. She just nodded once. You're right. That surprised him. Most feds spent the first 10 minutes explaining why everything they did was necessary and correct, and by the book. She didn't. She just waited. The evidence handoff was physical, deliberate. One document at a time. Hatchett placed the guardianship petitions on the table, side by side. The identical language visible even from across the room. Twice placed the financial records, dates highlighted, dollar amounts circled. Shepard placed Patricia Venner's written statement, 3 pages, single-spaced, every complaint, every routing, every failure. And Granger placed the recording device, a small digital recorder, the kind a journalist might use. 3 nights ago, Granger said quietly. Calla Merritt couldn't sleep. She heard Harlan on the phone with his attorney. She memorized the conversation. This morning we had her record it, word for word. He pressed play. Calla's voice filled the room. Quiet, precise, reciting the conversation exactly as she'd heard it. I've been doing this for 11 years. My word carries more weight than a child who can't even name the days of the week correctly. Experts say what they're paid to say. What they don't have is physical evidence because there isn't any. Bruises fade. That's a medical fact, not a cover-up. I just need her quiet until then. Same as last time. When the recording ended, Agent Ruiz was leaning forward. Her pen had stopped moving. Her glasses were off. This fills a gap we haven't been able to close, she said quietly. We had the financial trail. We didn't have intent. She looked up at Granger. If this is authenticated, it changes the scope of the charges significantly. It's authenticated, Granger said. And there's more. He told her about the 47 foster placements, the pattern that went back 16 years. the children whose names they still didn't know. When he finished, Ruiz was quiet for a long time. "I'll need full cooperation from your chapter." "You'll have it, on one condition." She waited. Calla gets a victim advocate assigned before any federal interview. Nobody talks to her without her approval. And the second arrest, he meant Roland Mace, happens today. Not after another week of paperwork. Ruiz held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she nodded. That's the job. At 6:13 p.m., every piece of evidence was laid out on the table in the back room of the clubhouse. Granger stood at the head. The brothers sat in a half-circle. Agent Ruiz stood to the side. Notepad open. Recording everything. The numbers landed like stones. 3 confirmed victims deceased. Sienna Walsh, age 10, died 4 years ago. $187,200 insurance payout. Tatum Greer, age 11, died 3 years and 2 months ago. $163,400 payout. Marcus Edwards Jr., age 9, transferred before completion. No payout. 1 current victim. Calla Merritt, age 9, estate value $312,600 at appointment, $161,400 remaining after 11 months, 47 foster placements under Harlan's coordination, status of 39 currently unknown, total documented theft, $458,700, estimated operation timeline, 16 years. Agent Ruiz listed the charges as they would be filed: wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, 3 counts of negligent homicide pending medical examiner review, child endangerment, felony assault, grand theft, obstruction of justice. If the medical examiner upgraded Tatum and Sienna's deaths from accidental to suspicious, 2 counts of murder in the 2nd degree. Granger's voice was quiet when he spoke. 47 placements. We know what happened to 4 of them. What about the other 43? We're going to find every single one, Ruiz said, and we're going to document every failure that let this continue for 16 years. The room was silent. Twice, finally spoke, his voice rough. How does someone do this for 16 years and nobody stops him? Because he looked safe, Shepard said quietly. He said the right things. He had the right credentials. And every single person who could have stopped him decided it was easier to believe him than to ask the hard questions. Granger checked his watch. 7:04 p.m. Harlan Driscoll had been released on bail 3 hours ago. $175,000 bond, posted by his attorney within 40 minutes of arraignment. He was home right now, at 214 Harrow Mill Road, making dinner, or watching television, or doing whatever a man does when he's convinced he's going to beat the charges because he always has before. We end this tonight, Granger said. At 7:43 p.m., 17 motorcycles pulled up to 214 Harrow Mill Road. No sirens, no lights. Just the low rumble of engines cutting off one by one until the street was silent, except for the sound of boots on pavement. Harlan Driscoll was in his kitchen, making a sandwich, turkey on wheat, lettuce, tomato, mayonnaise on both slices. He looked up when the headlights filled his windows, set the knife down slowly, walked to the door. Granger was standing on the porch, Shepard to his left, Cole to his right. 4 more brothers behind them. Not crowding, not threatening, just present. Harlan opened the door, looked at Granger. Recognition in his eyes. The man who'd walked Calla into the courthouse that morning. Then he smiled. Not nervous. Not forced. A practiced smile. The kind that had worked in PTA meetings and county board hearings and every conversation where someone had almost asked the hard questions, but decided not to. "Gentlemen," his voice was measured, calm. "I understand you're concerned about Calla. I want you to know I've always acted in her best interest." He stepped onto the porch, hands open, palms up, shoulders dropping from defensive to relaxed, a practiced move that signaled approachability. "I've made mistakes. I'll be the first to admit that. The arm injury. That was my failure to recognize she needed immediate medical care. I should have taken her to the hospital sooner. I accept full responsibility." His head tilted slightly, the empathy angle. "But I've devoted 16 years to child welfare. You can ask anyone in this county. Judge Whitmore, the school board, the Rotary Club. I've never, not once, acted with anything but the children's welfare in mind." He paused. Let that sit. Granger waited 3 full seconds, then asked one question. "Where did you get the $24,800 you transferred to Driscoll Mace Aggregate in August of last year?" The smile slipped. For exactly 1 second, Harlan's eyes went flat. Calculating, the mask cracking just enough to see what lived behind it. Then the smile came back, but it was too late. Granger had seen what he needed to see. Harlan's voice changed, still measured, but harder now. "You're holding me on my own property against my will. That's false imprisonment. My attorney will bury this club in litigation. You'll lose your charter, your bikes, everything." He stepped forward. Just 1 step. Testing. The brothers didn't move. "I have a relationship with every law enforcement agency in this county. 1 phone call ends this." Granger's expression didn't change. "You're welcome to call your attorney. The FBI is going to want to talk to him anyway." The word FBI landed. Harlan's face changed. Not panic, not yet. But the calculation was visible now. Working out angles. Exit strategies. Legal exposure. "You're bluffing. Agent Ruiz is parked 3 blocks away. She's waiting for my call. The one that says you tried to flee." Harlan went still. His voice dropped, softer now, almost pleading. "You don't understand what it's like. The system dumps these kids on you and expects miracles. Calla was difficult. Grieving, acting out. I was trying to provide structure, stability." He looked directly at Granger. "I lost my own wife 3 years ago. I know what grief does to a person. I was trying to help her through the same thing I went through." A pause. "I may have been too strict. I accept that. But my intentions were always in Calla's best interest. You have to believe that." Granger's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. 5 words. "I'm not interested in your reasons." A pause. "Neither is she." Phase 4. The break. Harlan's face went blank. Not the performance of calm. Not the practiced mask. Just nothing. For 5 full seconds, he stood there. A man whose every strategy had failed. Whose every calculation had come up empty. Then, quietly, almost to himself, I was careful. I was so careful. Not remorse, not apology, just the specific self-pity of a predator who thought he'd covered his tracks well enough. The room changed. Every brother felt it. The mask was off. Headlights swept across the house. 3 federal vehicles, 2 county sheriff's cars. Agent Ruiz stepped out first. Badge visible, search warrant in hand. Harlan looked at the vehicles, at the agents, at Granger. You had no authority to do this. I know, Granger said quietly. I just bought them time. And they did. Watched as federal agents photographed every room, documented every locked door, opened the basement Calla had been told was dangerous, found the financial documents stacked in labeled boxes, estate files, insurance policies, guardianship petitions going back 14 years, found Calla's room, bare mattress, cardboard over the window, disconnected heater, padlocked refrigerator in the hallway outside, found the study where Harlan had made the phone call 3 nights ago. The desk still holding a notepad with Roland Mace's number written at the top. At 9:47 p.m., Agent Ruiz placed Harlan Driscoll under federal arrest. Wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, child endangerment. 3 more charges would be filed within 72 hours once the medical examiner completed the review of Tatum Greer's autopsy file. Harlan's hands were cuffed behind his back. He stood in his own driveway, watching federal agents carry boxes of evidence from his house. And just before they put him in the vehicle, he turned to Granger. I did everything correctly, he said quietly. I followed procedure. I had approvals. Granger looked at him for a long moment. You're right. The system worked exactly the way it was designed. That's the whole problem. The door closed. The vehicle pulled away. The courthouse steps were still lined with brothers when Calla walked out at 2:47 p.m. that same day. 300 men who'd stood there for 4 hours. Waiting. She walked down slowly, still holding the bronze medallion in her right hand. Granger was at the bottom. Same place he'd been that morning. Same place he'd crouched and promised she wouldn't fall. Calla stopped in front of him. Then she did something he didn't expect. She reached down with her left hand, unclasped the pale blue hospital bracelet, the one she'd worn for 8 months. The one with faded ink that read Merit Calla, Pediatric, March 17th. She held it in her palm alongside the medallion, and placed both in Granger's hand. No words, she didn't need them. The bracelet had been proof, evidence that something had happened, that she'd been hurt, that someone should have noticed. She didn't need to carry proof anymore. Granger closed his fingers around the bracelet and the medallion, nodded once. You did good, he said quietly. Then she smiled. Small. Real. The first smile he'd ever seen from her. And Granger stood in the driveway of 214 Harrow Mill Road, looking at a house that had been a prison for at least 4 children and possibly dozens more. Justice had been served. But justice wasn't the ending. It was only the beginning. Ironside sat in the waiting room of Claiborne Medical Center at 9:14 a.m. the next morning. He'd driven Calla there himself. Didn't ask permission. Didn't wait for paperwork. Just showed up at the temporary placement home where she'd spent the night and said quietly, "Let's get that arm looked at properly." He'd brought a thermos of hot chocolate, the real kind, made with milk and actual cocoa powder, not a packet. Set it on the seat beside her in his truck without saying a word about it. Now he sat in a waiting room chair that was too small for a man his size, holding that thermos, while Calla was in the exam room with Dr. Patricia Okoye and a victim advocate named Marie. The door opened 23 minutes later. Dr. Okoye stepped out first. She was 47. Pediatric orthopedist. She'd been practicing for 19 years and had seen every kind of break a child's body could sustain. She looked at Ironside. Her expression was carefully neutral in the way doctors learn to be when the news isn't good, but also isn't the worst it could have been. The fracture healed poorly. There's significant angulation at the distal radius. She'll need a surgical consultation to determine if a corrective osteotomy is indicated. Ironside's jaw tightened. In English. The bone set crooked. We may need to re-break it and set it properly, or we accept the deformity and work around it with physical therapy. What's best for her? That depends on her pain levels and functional limitation. We'll monitor for 6 months. If she's managing well, we don't touch it. If she's struggling, we consider intervention. Ironside nodded slowly. Dr. Okoye's voice softened. You got her here when you did. That matters. Another year of neglect, and we'd be talking about permanent nerve damage. She looked at the thermos in his hands. Thank you for getting her here, she said quietly. Then she walked back into the exam room. When Calla came out, her arm was in a proper brace. Not a drugstore splint, a custom-fitted orthotic with Velcro straps and padding that actually protected the healing bone. She looked at Ironside. She said I might need surgery. Maybe. Maybe not. We'll figure it out. Will it hurt? Yeah, but you'll be asleep for it, and after there's medicine, and you won't be alone. Calla was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up the thermos, held it with both hands. Can I have some? That's why I brought it. 3 days later, Calla sat at a table in the Iron Valley clubhouse at 6:47 p.m. Spaghetti with red sauce, garlic bread, a glass of milk, a small bowl of strawberries. She stared at it. 17 brothers were scattered around the clubhouse. Some at the bar, some at the pool table, some just standing around talking the way men do when they have nowhere else to be and no reason to leave. None of them were looking at her directly, but all of them were watching. Shepard sat across from her, not eating, just sitting there like it was the most normal thing in the world to have dinner with a 9-year-old girl who'd spent 11 months learning that food could be taken away at any moment. It's yours, he said quietly. All of it. Nobody's going to take it. Calla picked up her fork, put it down, picked it up again. What if I can't finish it? Then you don't. We'll wrap it up. You can have it tomorrow. She twirled spaghetti onto her fork. Slowly, like she was waiting for someone to tell her to stop. No one did. She took a bite, chewed, swallowed, then another. By the third bite, she was crying. Not sobbing, just tears running down her face while she ate. Because this was the first meal in 11 months where no one was timing her. No one was watching to see if she took too much. No one was going to lock the food away when the clock hit 8 p.m. Shepard didn't say anything, just slid a napkin across the table. From the bar, Ironside's voice carried across the room. Anybody wants seconds, there's a whole pot on the stove. The words weren't for the brothers. They were for Calla. And she heard them. The house was on Maple Street. 1847 Maple Street. The same address number as Calla's old home on Old Mill Road, not a coincidence. Not. Cole had found it specifically. Called in a favor from a widow named Dorothy Parker, who owned 3 rental properties in Claiborne, and had been looking for the right tenant for 6 months. She didn't want rent. She wanted a safe place for a child who'd lost everything. The Iron Valley chapter raised $13,800 in 4 days. Donations from 9 chapters across 4 states. Enough to cover first and last month, furnishings, 6 months of utilities, and a trust account for school expenses. Calla stood on the porch at 4:22 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. Cole beside her. Dorothy Parker, holding a single key. "It's small," Dorothy said. 2 bedrooms. The heat works. The windows lock from the inside. And I'm 3 blocks away if you need anything. She pressed the key into Calla's hand. "This is your home. Nobody can take it from you. You understand?" Calla's fingers closed around the key. It was brass. Warm from Dorothy's hand. Solid. She walked inside. Hardwood floors, a couch that still had tags on the cushions, a kitchen table with 4 chairs, a refrigerator, not padlocked, just a normal refrigerator, with actual food inside. Milk, eggs, bread, peanut butter, strawberries. In the smaller bedroom, there was a bed with a real mattress, not on the floor, on a frame, with a headboard, sheets that matched, a quilt, 2 pillows. On the nightstand, someone had left a stuffed rabbit. Gray, floppy-eared. With a note pinned to its chest in handwriting she recognized as Shepard's. "So you're not alone at night. The brothers." Calla sat on the edge of the bed. The window wasn't painted shut. The curtains were actual curtains, not cardboard. The heater hummed softly in the corner. Working. Warm. Cole stood in the doorway, watching her process it. "You okay?" She nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. "I don't know." "That's okay. You don't have to know yet." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, set it on the dresser. "Emergency numbers, my cell. Ironsides, Shepard's, Granger's, Dorothy's. The victim advocate. If you need anything, and I mean anything, even at 3 a.m., you call one of those numbers. Someone will answer." Calla picked up the stuffed rabbit, held it against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole crouched, same way Granger had on the courthouse steps, eye level. "You don't thank family for showing up. That's just what family does." They came by 1s and 2s over the next 3 days. Not a parade, not a big production, just brothers stopping in to make sure she was settling in. Twice brought a laptop, showed her how to video call in case she needed to reach someone. Wrote his number in permanent marker on the back of the case. "Anytime," he said. "I mean it. 2 a.m., 4 a.m., doesn't matter. You call." Hatchet brought books, a whole box of them. Fantasy novels, adventure stories, books about kids who survived impossible things and came out the other side. "Figured you might want something to do that isn't just sitting here thinking," he said. Ironside came last. Saturday evening. He didn't bring anything. He just crouched in front of her. Same way Cole had. Same way Granger had on those courthouse steps that felt like a lifetime ago, but had only been 9 days. "You know what courage is?" he asked quietly. Calla shook her head. "It's not the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing when you're terrified. You've got more of it than anyone I've ever met. He stood, patted her shoulder once. Gentle. You're going to be okay. Not today. Not tomorrow. But eventually. And until then, you've got 300 brothers who won't let you fall. When the door closed behind him, Calla sat on her couch, her actual couch in her actual home, and cried until she couldn't breathe. Not from sadness, from relief. Within 2 weeks, the logistics were in place. School enrollment, Claiborne Elementary, 4th grade, Mrs. Harrison's class, a teacher who'd been briefed by the victim advocate and knew not to ask Calla to talk about what happened until she was ready. Therapy, Dr. Melanie Cross, trauma-informed child psychologist, Tuesdays at 4 p.m. No pressure, no forced disclosure, just a safe room and someone who listened. Legal protection, restraining order filed against Harlan Driscoll. 500 feet, no contact, no third-party contact. Violation meant immediate arrest. Medical follow-up. Dr. Okoye, every 6 weeks, monitoring the arm, watching for functional limitation, ready to intervene if needed. Financial support, the $13,800 from the chapter, plus a victim's compensation fund that provided $3,200 for immediate needs, plus the estate, still frozen, still in litigation. But Agent Ruiz had assured Dorothy Parker that every dollar Harlan had stolen would eventually be returned. And throughout all of it, the brothers checked in, not hovering, not smothering, just there. Cole texted every morning at 7:15 a.m. "You up? You good?" Shepard called every Sunday evening, talked about nothing important, just normal conversation, the kind a kid needs when they're learning what normal feels like. Ironside picked her up for medical appointments, brought hot chocolate every time. And Granger, who'd crouched on cold courthouse steps and promised she wouldn't fall. He stopped by every Wednesday evening, sat on her porch, talked about his son, the one he'd lost, the one who'd needed someone like Granger but never got him in time. He never told her she reminded him of his boy. He didn't have to. She could see it in the way he looked at her. Like she was proof that sometimes when you get a second chance, you don't waste it. But this story isn't really about bikers or patches or 300 men on motorcycles. It's about what happens when one person decides that looking away isn't an option. When a 9-year-old girl chooses courage over silence. When a man who's carried grief for 27 years decides that other people's children won't suffer the way his did. It's about a system that failed, and the people who refused to accept that failure as final. 2 weeks after the arrest, Granger sat in his truck outside 1847 Maple Street at 9:43 p.m. He hadn't planned to be here. He'd been riding past on his way home from a chapter meeting. Saw the light on in Calla's bedroom window. The curtains open. Not because she'd forgotten to close them, because she could leave them open now. Through the window he could see her at a small desk, doing homework. The stuffed rabbit propped up on the corner like it was keeping watch. She looked up once, stretched, went back to writing. A normal kid, doing normal kid things. In a home where the doors locked from the inside and the food stayed in the refrigerator and nobody was coming to hurt her, Granger's chest felt heavy. The specific weight that lives alongside relief. The understanding that what was taken from this child could never be fully returned. Only worked around. Only built over. Only survived. He didn't go to the door. Didn't knock. She didn't need him tonight. She just needed to be a kid doing homework on a Wednesday night. He pulled out his phone, opened the folder labeled Why We Ride, added a new photo. Not of Calla, never of victims without permission, just a screenshot of the courthouse steps, empty, cold, November light, the place where she'd sat alone, where she'd asked a stranger for help, where 300 men had answered without asking why. He typed 2 words beneath it. She's safe. Then he set the phone down, started the engine, pulled away from the curb. He didn't look back. 18 months after that November morning, Calla Merritt stood on the same courthouse steps. Not for testimony this time. For something else. Agent Ruiz had called her 3 days prior, asked if she'd be willing to meet with a group of social workers and child advocates who were studying the Driscoll case, if she'd be willing to talk about what she'd seen, what had failed, what could have been different. Calla had said yes. She was 11 now. Taller, hair longer. The bruise on her jaw was long gone. The arm still held at that slight angle, but Dr. Okoye had determined that surgery wasn't necessary. Physical therapy had restored 92% of normal function. The remaining 8% was something Calla barely noticed anymore. She stood on the second step from the bottom, the exact spot where she'd sat 18 months ago, clutching a folder and waiting for someone to notice she was drowning. Now she was here to make sure other kids didn't drown the same way. The conference room held 37 people, social workers, CPS supervisors, family court judges, the people whose decisions determined whether children lived or died. Calla sat at the front. Agent Ruiz to her left. Dorothy Parker to her right. She told them about the system. Not the abuse. They already knew that. She told them about complaints that disappeared, neighbors who called and were ignored, the guardian ad litem who spent 22 minutes in Harlan's kitchen and saw nothing wrong. I wasn't invisible, she said quietly. People saw me. They just decided I wasn't their problem. The room was silent. 3 other kids died before me. You can't fix this with more training. You fix it by making sure the person being investigated isn't the person handling the investigation. When she finished, a county clerk in the back asked, What do you want us to do differently? Calla didn't hesitate. Believe children. The first time. Every time. After the conference, Shepard was waiting outside the courthouse, leaning against his bike. He'd driven up from Iron Valley specifically to make sure she got home safe. Calla walked down the steps, slower than she had 18 months ago. Not from fear, just from exhaustion. How'd it go? Shepard asked. I don't know. They listened. Whether they do anything about it? She shrugged. Shepard nodded. You did your part. That's all anyone can ask. They rode home in silence, Calla's arms around his waist. The November wind colder this year, but somehow easier to bear. When they pulled up to 1847 Maple Street, Calla didn't get off right away. Shepard? Yeah? Do you think it matters? What I said today? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to look at her. 4 months ago, Kentucky changed its mandatory reporting laws. Complaints can't be routed to the same department anymore. They have to go to an independent investigator. You know why that happened? Calla shook her head. Because a federal agent used your case as evidence that the old system was designed to fail. Your testimony, your courage, that changed the law. So yeah, it matters. 7 years later, Calla worked for the Kentucky Department of Child and Family Services in Frankfort. Policy analyst, reviewing cases, identifying systemic failures. Boring work, spreadsheets and meetings, But every case was a child who might live or die based on whether someone paid attention. On a Tuesday in October, a file crossed her desk. 7-year-old boy. Suspicious bruising. Teacher filed a complaint. The complaint had been routed to the foster parent's own agency for internal review. Calla read it 3 times, then called the CPS supervisor. "Ms. Pate, this needs an independent investigator. We have protocol. Your protocol is going to get this child killed." The words came out harder than intended. Calla didn't take them back. "I was Calla Merritt, age 9, 3 complaints routed internally, all closed. He's serving 19 years. 3 children are dead." She looked up. "If you root this internally, you will regret it for the rest of your life." Jennifer Pate picked up the phone. "I'm reassigning this to external review, effective immediately." 3 weeks later, the boy was safe. The foster parent arrested. 2 other victims identified. And Calla sat in her office, thinking about a 9-year-old girl who'd asked a stranger to make sure she didn't fall. She'd kept the bronze medallion. It sat on her desk now, worn smooth. A reminder that courage is asking for help when you're terrified, and showing up when someone else asks you. She'd kept that bronze medallion. Granger had told her to give it back when she came out of the courtroom. She never had. It sat on her desk now. Worn smooth. The Hells Angels insignia barely visible. A reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's asking for help when you're terrified. And showing up when someone else asks you. Granger sat on his porch at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday in October. Same Wednesday that Calla had pulled that case in Frankfurt. He didn't know about it yet. Wouldn't know for another 3 days when she called to tell him. But tonight, he was thinking about his son. The boy who'd died in foster care 27 years ago, while Granger was on his 3rd deployment. The boy who'd needed someone like Granger but never got him in time. His phone buzzed. A text from Calla. "Stopped a bad placement today. Kid's safe now. Thought you'd want to know." Granger stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, "That's what courage looks like." He set the phone down, looked out at the dark Kentucky hills, thought about all the children he couldn't save, and the ones he did. You don't get over losing a child. You just learn to carry it differently. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a second chance to do it right. Not with your own kid. That chance is gone. But with someone else's. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that has to be. This story isn't about whether bikers are good or bad. It's not about leather vests or motorcycles or 300 men making noise. It's about the moment when looking away stops being an option. If you've ever seen something wrong and convinced yourself it wasn't your problem, you're not alone. Most people do exactly that. Because intervening is hard. It's uncomfortable. It puts you in the middle of something messy and complicated and potentially dangerous. But here's the truth those 37 people in that conference room learned. The system doesn't fail because it's broken. It fails because good people decide that someone else will handle it. The teacher who notices but doesn't report. The neighbor who hears but doesn't call. The professional who sees but doesn't document. They're not monsters. They're just people who made a calculation. And children die from those calculations. So if there's someone in your life, a kid, a neighbor, an elderly person, who seems off, Who's too quiet or too controlled or carrying injuries that don't match the explanation? Don't wait for certainty. Don't wait for proof beyond doubt. Pay attention. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Make the call even if your voice shakes. You don't need 300 motorcycles to change a story. You just need to be the one person who doesn't look away. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And in the comments, tell me this. Who was the person who didn't look away for you? Or who was the person you wish had shown up? Because every one of us has been Calla at some point, sitting alone, hoping someone will notice. And every one of us can be Granger, the person who crouches down, makes eye contact, and says, "Nobody falls while I'm standing here." A 9-year-old girl with a healing fracture and a plastic hospital bracelet, 8 months old, stepped off a county bus on a freezing November morning and made a choice that grown adults had refused to make. She walked to the courthouse alone. But she didn't walk back alone. And that made all the difference. Before we go any further, you need to know something. If you suspect a child is being abused, you don't need proof. You don't need to be certain. You just need to make the call. In the United States, call 1-800-4A-CHILD, 1-800-422-4453. That's the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline. 24 hours, every day, confidential. Or call 911 if a child is in immediate danger. What to report? The child's name and age, the address where they live. What you saw, bruises, weight loss, fear, unexplained injuries. What you heard, screaming, threats, a child asking for help. You don't have to give your name. But if you do, it makes the report stronger. What happens next? Child Protective Services investigates within 24 to 72 hours, depending on severity. They interview the child. They check the home. They decide if the child is safe. Here's what Calla's case taught us. If the complaint gets routed to the abuser's own department, it dies there. So when you call, ask which agency is handling the investigation. Write down the case number. Follow up in 1 week. If nothing's happened, call again. And again. Because Agnes Whitfield made the call. Patricia Venner buried it. And Calla spent 5 more months in that house. The system only works if someone refuses to let it fail. That someone can be you.